Welcome again to the Central Point Seventh-day Adventist Church. I'm so glad that you're here. See, I got talking about Central Point, yeah. Sorry about that. That was on me. First one was on you. We'll get there. Welcome to the State Line Seventh-day Adventist Church. I'm so glad that you're here. This is the final meeting of a weekend program that we had called Be Healed. And today we thought it would be appropriate to ask the doctor to be able to have some questions. Many times through a series like this, people come up with questions. And those questions come out of their own personal experience or out of perhaps a family member who is having health issues. And so we thought it would be very appropriate for the doctor to be able to stand up here on the hot seat, as it were, and to be able to answer questions. And so I just wanted to encourage you. We're going to have a couple of microphones that we'll pass around for you to be able to ask your questions. Now, do understand that the doctor here might not be able to fully answer these questions fully without having some medical appointments and labs taken and that sort of thing. So, having said that, we are so grateful to have Dr. Saeed and Rhonda Saeed here for one last time. And so we are going to, before we invite Dr. Saeed to come up and to share with us, let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Father in heaven, Lord, you have created us in such a marvelous way. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. And Lord, we realize that, but we also realize that the devil is trying to destroy us, because if he can destroy us physically, then he can get at us mentally, and then spiritually, and ultimately he wants us to join him in the lake of fire. And that is exactly what we do not want to happen. And so I pray today that as you speak through Dr. Saeed today, that he would give the right answer, the right words at the right time that comes from the throne of grace. Thank you for promising to do that, for we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Dr. Saeed, please come and share with us.
Okay. Thank you. A wonderful morning to each of you. Oh, are we on? Whoop. Still a wonderful morning, whether you can hear me or not. How's that? Good. I'd like to begin this morning's question-answer process with a moment of prayer. Please join me. Oh, Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you that you are sending your Spirit to each of us now. Guide this process. May your Spirit touch each one of us. Bring forward the questions that are pertinent to each person's life here. May a response be that which is appropriate for them to know how to cooperate with you, Lord. For I ask this in Jesus' name, amen. So we've done this many times in Central Point, and I enjoy this process thoroughly because it allows you to ask questions where you wonder, or lingering questions that haven't been addressed, that we can dialogue what's going on. And sometimes the question will be, or the response will be, more than I can give just in this setting without data. But if that's the case, I'll let you know on the kind of data we look for as well. But I've got a series of questions here that I'm happy to address first. Pardon? Or go ahead. I'm happy to take it from the floor. If you have a question to start, that's fine.
I guess two questions. What is your thoughts on soy if you have an autoimmune disease? Is it safe? Or is it? And then the other question is how to treat Hashimoto's disease.
How what?
How to treat Hashimoto's.
Good. So I deal with both of those a lot. So regarding soy first, we do evaluation of food reactivities using antigens that are IgG reactive. Now, these are not allergies that create an anaphylactic reaction where you're going to get hives and your throat's going to swell and it's going to kill you. But it's a reactivity that causes inflammation in the gut. And that reaction in the gut will trigger reaction in the brain. And so soy is a very common reactor. So are black beans, navy beans, and oftentimes pinto beans. But black bean and navy bean especially. They're in the same family with soy. So I have my patients, when they're tested and they show up positive that way, and many do, I ask them to refrain from those beans. Other beans are fine, but not those. Now, soy is an issue. Most soy is genetically modified. But even if it's not genetically modified, soy has in it 3 constituents that are a problem. It's got hemagglutinins that causes red blood cells to clump, called rouleau formation. And now the red blood cells stick together and they can't get through the capillary sponge or capillary bed well to feed nutrition and oxygen to the cell and take up CO2 and garbage from the cell. So that's a problem. Secondly, it has antitrypsins, which then compete with the assimilation of proteins. It also has constituents that compete with assimilation of vitamins and minerals. So it causes depletion of nutrients, macronutrients and micronutrients in the gut. So I don't recommend soy. Now, if you have soy at all, it's going to be fermented, not tofu, but tempeh. But even then, I don't recommend it, or if you have it, not much at all and infrequently. So I'm concerned about soy. Soy is also a phytoestrogen, but that's less of the issue. The issues are more about assimilation problems and competing with assimilation of vitamins, minerals, and proteins and causing red blood cells to actually clump together. So to me, soy is really not a food. Now that may sound heresy to you, but it's what I see in the clinic, it's what I see in the literature, and it's what I see when I test my patients. Now, Hashimoto's. Well, Hashimoto's is a big deal. I have hundreds of Hashimoto's cases at any one time, all over the country. And Hashimoto's, as you know, is autoimmune thyroiditis. So it's an autoimmune condition against the thyroid gland. Now, it's a big deal. The people that have done the research are actually good friends of mine, and I've studied their work. We've worked together for years. And one in particular, Dr. Vojdani, has done most of the pioneering research on autoimmunity. And he has a lab in LA that does this work. Hashimoto's is an autoimmune reaction against the thyroid gland that's triggered principally by 3 different proteins, from gluten, from dairy, and from eggs. That's in the medical literature now. There's other foods that are reactive as well, but those 3 are the big 3. In fact, on my Hashimoto's patients, I say 5 foods are not to be ever eaten again. Gluten, eggs, dairy, soy, and sugar, because of the inflammatory reactions. But the autoimmune reaction is classically gluten number 1, then dairy, then eggs, and for some soy. Now, why is that? It's called molecular mimicry. The molecules that break down from gluten especially, called gliadins, look like a structure of genetic code that looks like the same structure as cells in the thyroid gland. And so when the body attacks the gluten or the gliadin in the gut from an undigested protein that can't be fully broken down from gluten, and the reason, by the way, is gluten today is much higher in gliadins than it was 50 years ago. It used to be 5% gluten in wheat, for example. Now it's 50% gluten. So they hybridized it in order to not put dough pep in the dough when they make bread. So it's now inherent in the wheat itself to make it cheaper to make bread, for example. But the downside is it's no longer the staff of life. It's kind of the staff of death for a lot of people. I never put it that way before, but it works. And so what happens is you have so much gluten you can't break it down. Now, when we don't break down the gluten in our GI tract, what happens is it creates what's called zonulins and occludins from the gliadin. These are chemistries that go into the gut cell that break down the tight junctions or the gut cell binders between gut cells or enterocytes. When they break apart, then what happens is it allows a channel to be opened directly from the gut to the bloodstream that should not be there. So large molecules like undigested gluten can get through. Small molecules like vitamins and minerals can't. They're disrupted. So you create nutrient deficiencies and food reactivities. Now, when that GLAD molecule gets through, the body tags it and it looks for other proteins like that, and it finds them, for example, in the thyroid gland. You develop Hashimoto's, or Graves' disease, the other extreme of that. Now, I've seen Hashimoto's create hyper and hypothyroid symptoms, but most commonly hypothyroid. Sometimes hyperthyroid in the beginning, and then it degenerates to hypothyroid. So what happens is over time, the thyroid gland becomes scar tissue. So it becomes non-functional tissue. So it's progressively more and more hypothyroid. Now, in treating Hashimoto's, as I said, the first thing is cut out the foods that are triggering that reactivity. Gluten, eggs, dairy, especially also soy and sugar. That's a must. I tell my Hashimoto's patients, if you can't do that, you can't recover. It's that simple. And they go, okay. Then we realize it's not a thyroid problem. It's an immune system problem. The thyroid is the target organ, but the immune system is what's gone awry. So what happens in the immune system, you create what are called B cells that generate antibodies against the thyroid gland. So it's called the Th2 overdrive. That's just what happens in the immune system. So you get these kinds of cells that drive B cell populations to create antibodies against the thyroid gland. Then you downregulate the Th1 cells, as they're called, and neutrophils that help you deal with infections. So now you're more prone to infection as you create more and more antibodies against your thyroid gland. Now, there's many different kinds of autoimmune conditions. Hashimoto's is one against the thyroid. But I've seen autoimmune conditions against all kinds of tissues. But I'll just stay with Hashimoto's right now. So then what we do is we downregulate the Th2 side and upregulate the Th1 side to bring it back into balance. We do that through nutrition. One thing we use is PABA, paraminobenzoic acid, which is vitamin B10, which is known to protect the thyroid gland from attack. Then we use nutrients to strengthen the immune system, and there's various ways we go about that, depending on the person's needs, which we test through chemistries, to determine how to best manage regulating the immune system to downregulate the B cell population and upregulate the neutrophils, to balance the immune system. So there's ways to do that nutritionally. Now, diet. I mentioned those 5 foods. What are they? Gluten, eggs, dairy, soy, and sugar. You're going to hear sugar a lot today. I have lots of questions here that relate to sugar, but you don't know it yet. And so, with these 5 foods out of the diet, we then measure what other foods are reactive. Now, when I see a person with autoimmunity, I know there's other foods they're reactive to other than just those. Always. So we test those foods, measuring IgG reactivities and sometimes IgA reactivities. You know, there's 5 different immune system reactions going on in the body all the time. Immunoglobulins, G-A-M-E-N-D, called GAMED. Easy way to remember it. So IgE is allergy reactivities, but you have other forms that are also reactivities that don't cause allergies per se, but cause hypersensitivities. So what happens then is you measure these other aspects against foods to know what foods are causing these reactions. So we measure that through chemistries. It's very straightforward to do. There's only one lab in the country I'll use in Seattle called Meridian Valley Lab, because I get good repeatable data from them over years. And that's important. I'm a stickler for the labs that I use. So when we measure that, we know what the diet needs to look like and not look like. And that's crucially important. Then we measure the thyroid all the way through. We measure carefully what's going on with the thyroid to manage hormonal balance. And I've seen many thyroid cases from Hashimoto's fully recover, to not require medication anymore at all. Others, medication for life, but it's stable. And I work to stabilize the thyroid and then the adrenals with that in every Hashimoto's case that I work with. Good. Any lingering question with that? Okay. Yes?
I was wondering, if you're taking the gluten out of the diet, then eat gluten-free bread and etc., or what do you do? And the other question is, how much does it cost to come to your health center?
Good. So I like the et cetera part especially. So I tell my patients to avoid gluten because of the interleukin-10 reaction in the gut that happens with everybody, causing inflammation in the gut, and then the issues that happen with breakdown of the gut lining. And I have them eat gluten-free. Now, most gluten-free bread tastes like cardboard. That's being gentle. I have some people who are bakers who experiment. We usually have people eat what's called simple needs bread. Simple needs, K-N-E-A-D-S, like kneading bread. And it's simpleneeds.com. It turns out to be the fastest growing gluten-free bread company in the country. And it's that way because it tastes wonderful. It's sourdough. It actually is the same culture that Ellen White used in Australia. It was brought to this country and was added to this bread to make a true gluten-free sourdough. And it's the cleanest bread I've ever seen, and it tastes like real bread. It's fantastic. It's purely whole grain. It's completely gluten-free. There's no sugar, no eggs, no dairy, no additives, no gums. It's a very clean, pure bread. So I have my patients typically default to that for gluten-free bread. And they just came out with a new one. It's a cinnamon raisin bread, which is outrageously good. I happen to like cinnamon bread. But I've not been able to eat it because it's not been available gluten-free until recently. But anyway, it's an excellent bread. And so that's an option. Now, people have to be very careful when they go out to restaurants. And my wife and I are both gluten-free, and we are successful. You just ask a lot of questions, and a good chef will generally accommodate you. More and more places are waking up to gluten-free need because more of the population is waking up to their intolerance to gluten. So that works well. In terms of the cost of the retreats, I'm going to defer to my wife. So just I'll give you my wife's phone number. Is that okay? And just call her. She manages all the logistics of that. When people come to the retreats, they go for about 10 to 14 days. And some people come back to back, depending on their needs. And the protocols are such that I do their workup before they get there, so we know what to expect and what's going on and what the needs are. And then my wife administers all the modalities that are needed for them, and she's a gluten-free chef, vegan gluten-free chef. She's taught chefs to become vegan chefs. Her cooking is beyond incredible. I'm a blessed man in many ways. And so she cooks, I clean. And that works just fine for me. If I were to cook, it'd be all over. So she does that at the retreats, and every single patient has a different diet because I measure their food reactivities. And my wife accommodates that for each individual patient that comes. So it's tailored to each person. There's modalities that we do for every person there, and there's modalities that we do uniquely for each person there. So it's really tailored to the individual. And Rhonda runs that with the staff that she trains. And I usually I lecture. I'll talk to patients. I'll give talks to them. And so we make it very informative, and I just call it boot camp. When you come, you're there, and you're there to get well. And as my wife says, she provides cooking classes for them all the time. So by the time they're done, they have recipes, meal plans, ways of dealing with food. She makes food taste incredibly good and highly nutritious. And so the patients learn, or the retreat guests learn how to do that. And they come away with skills that they've never had before, and they continue those. But my wife's phone number is 541-840-1895. And you can reach her on that number. It's her cell. And she addresses all the questions regarding the logistics of the retreats. She sets up the dates, the formats, the training, all of that, mercifully. Good. Any other questions? Yes? I'll go here and then here.
Oh, hi, sorry. First of all, I just want to thank you both so much that you blessed our church with your presence, because I think it's very timely in the times in which we live. I just have 3 quick questions. I don't know if the first one will be that quick, but in regard to Alzheimer's, do you recommend any sort of protocol prior to potentially getting it? My mother does have it. She's 83. Physically, like, she's very healthy, but her mind is pretty much gone. And as her daughter, I'm concerned about myself. And I am vegan. I've been vegan for quite some time. I do exercise regularly, drink lots of water, try to avoid sugar, caffeine, and all that. But I'm just wondering if there's anything else that I can do for myself. And then my second quick question is, what is the difference between the coconut aminos versus the Bragg's regular soy aminos? And then also, is nutritional yeast an excitotoxin?
Got it.
Thank you.
So let me do them in reverse order. So nutritional yeast is effectively yeast, and it is regarded as an excitotoxin to the brain, so I don't encourage that. Secondly, Bragg's aminos is heated, and it's soy, so it becomes a free glutamate. That's well known. Coconut secret aminos is not. I actually wrote the company to find out what they did, and they wrote me back that we do not heat up the coconut aminos, so it's not made into free glutamate, so that's a safer approach to use for seasoning. It's just a different flavor. But Bragg's aminos is effectively MSG. It's just repackaged. Now, Alzheimer's is something we deal with a lot, dementia, and neurodegenerative conditions. A big part of my practice is neurochemistry and neuroendocrine chemistry. And with Alzheimer's, we've had actually Alzheimer's cases come to the ranch for retreats. And one lady came, I was in awe. She was eating properly finally. We cleaned up her diet. She went on a vegan diet, raw vegan in the beginning, that my wife will manage. And for the first time in years, she started singing songs that she remembered early in her life. Now, she's not from this country. That wasn't in English. But her daughter was helping us understand what she was saying. And she had been a patient for years and finally came to the ranch and cleaned things up. She couldn't sustain it at home. The circumstances were such that it was awkward for them. But it improved when she was there. We also put her in a hyperbaric oxygen chamber to get oxygen to the brain. Now, a lot of research is being done currently on Alzheimer's. And we understand it truly as a neurodegenerative process. And there's ways of managing reversal of neurodegeneration. I mentioned a little bit of it earlier. I lose track of yesterday or the day before. And what we look at is, first and foremost, take all the pro-inflammatory triggers out of the diet. So please, no refined carbs, no coffee, no black tea, no chocolate, no fried foods, the things we mentioned yesterday. Take out all the flesh foods, all the arachidonic acid containing foods, eggs, dairy, meat, fish, fowl. These are all pro-inflammatory to the brain. Now, and also obviously the additives, the neurotoxins we mentioned also. And I have that in writing. If you'd like, I can provide it, and you can provide it to everyone here. Because I give that to each of my patients. So they have it in writing to know what to do and not to do, what not to do. Now, there are certain nutrients that are essential to the brain, and especially for memory, to develop acetylcholine in the brain, necessary for memory. So we use like huperzine A, vinpocetine as examples. Bacopa monnieri is another one. Ginkgo biloba is one that most people are aware of. So there are formulas that we use that have all these in it that support neuroregeneration and acetylcholine regeneration. They're just basic nutrients and botanicals. The Lord has provided in nature an incredible array of health support. And the botanical world is rich with that. So is the nutritional world. And the understanding is emerging in large ways to know how to use that. So we do that kind of thing often with patients dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's or Alzheimer's issues, or even people that say, look, I can't remember where I put my keys anymore. Or a word just escapes me, I can't remember that anymore. Or I don't know what happened yesterday, I can't remember it anymore. Things that begin to show early signs of dementia. So we just start right away when that happens because it has their attention. Now, I also do very careful workups with my patients through blood work and salivary work. I look at blood testing. I look at it a bit more thoroughly than most physicians Because I'm not just looking at normals and abnormals, I'm looking at optimal levels of physiology. So I want to understand, what does the physiology look like? So I can answer the question, why are you experiencing what you're experiencing? So I look at chemistries in a wide way. I also look at the adrenal hormones, the steroid hormones, that affect how we reduce inflammation, and how we control glucose regulation to the brain, and how we manage the day-night wake-sleep cycle, and how we manage adaptation in general and stress management. All that shows up there. It shows me what the brain is doing, what the adrenals are doing, what the ovaries and testes are doing, all from that steroid cascade. So we look at all that information together, plus the dietary information. In some cases, we see fungal problems affecting brain function. Seriously. Many people have fungal overloads or mycotoxic burdens that are huge. And we measure that kind of thing as well, as need be. For some people, we measure heavy metal toxicity, which can affect brain function, especially aluminum or mercury or cadmium or arsenic or lead. So we measure blood levels of that, and then we know what to do to detoxify that from the system. Now, what's crucial is detoxing. Now I'm going to add this to it because this is a big part of it. There are 3 levels of detoxing. You have detoxing from the cell, detoxing through the vascular system to get the garbage to the liver, and then detoxing of the liver to empty it out of the liver to the bile, into the colon, or into the through the kidneys into the urine to detox the system. And there's nutrients that we use and ways to support that, but the foremost is proper diet. You notice it's called supplementation. It's supplementing the diet. The diet's primary. So leafy greens. Now, having said that, many people are reactive to kale. Kale has very strong plant auxins that protect it in nature that are toxic to the body for some people. They react to it. So we measure that. You wouldn't think kale would be an issue, but for some it's an issue. For some, most it's not. But where it's an issue, it's a problem. I've even seen spinach reactive. It's rare, but it happens. So if you're eating things that you think are fine and you find out, whoa, these are a problem, and you cut those out, now the body can start reducing inflammation in the gut and the brain and through the rest of the system, joints, etc. So we take out all the pro-inflammatory triggers, crucial, and then things I mentioned yesterday in that brief talk. Then we look at the nutrients necessary to support the brain chemistry. We look at what it takes to regenerate the brain. I mentioned yesterday briefly that exercise in the brain is really important to create new neural networks. So in Alzheimer's and dementia, you've lost neurons. You've lost connections. So you want to start generating new connections of neurons. That's called learning. Remember I mentioned that program called Lumosity? Were you here for that? A few? Write it down. Lumosity.com. Lumosity. Lumosity.com. It's an excellent brain training program written by neurologists for retraining the brain to develop new networks in the brain rapidly, to create learning and create the capacity of the brain to remember, for memory especially, and now an analytic capacity and association to understand what we're hearing, seeing, feeling, tasting, smelling, so our perceptions can improve. So these are things that are not small, that are a big deal. Exercise also is crucial. Remember I mentioned one of the strongest supports to brain function is exercise. Vigorous 10 minutes a day. Get out and walk. Get on a little treadmill. Get on a little mini trampoline. Just bounce. We have some patients so sick that they can only put their feet on the trampoline and someone else bounces for them, and they start the process that way. And then they develop further. And make sure there's a hoop or something around it so you can hold on to it when they start standing and doing it themselves until they can get out and walk and move. But movement is essential. Movement is life. And the brain requires movement to regenerate continually. The whole brain is dedicated to movement. So these are just basics to understand what to do to deal with neurodegenerative processes in people that already are far advanced or that are concerned about becoming that. Good. Yes.
So I just had a quick question, a couple of them actually. We have a family friend who had stage 4 cancer. She changed who had stage 4 cancer. She beat it with diet change and whatnot. She found though that on her scans that when she had honey versus table sugar or cane sugar, the tumors would grow with the sugar but not grow with the honey. What is your thought on honey versus other sugars?
Okay.
Specifically raw.
Got it. The last statement?
Raw honey.
Right.
And then my secondary question is, any tips and tricks for those of us that do have to work night shift for ways we can
Wow.
help ourselves?
Well, the first tip is to find another job where you can sleep during the night. That's a tough one. I'll address that one first. So when we measure the cortisol rhythm from morning till night, we can see what that rhythm looks like for the person. And people that do night shifts, it's flipped. It's low in the morning and high at night because they're on demand. So you have to just deal with the regulatory process that you have, which is counter to nature. Okay? Our cycles are designed to go with sun-moon cycles, day-night cycles. And when we thwart that or go against it, there's going to be a backlash. Can't stop it. So I have many of my patients seek day jobs. Now, I know night shifts are essential in some professions. You can't get away from it. So you work with it the best you can. You find out what the rhythm looks like. You find out how can you recover on the days that you have off. You try to work as few nights as possible and take as many days off as you can to sleep those nights. So now more and more professions are waking up to that need, so they're doing compressed nighttime shifts or all night long shifts, and then extended times off to give people a time to recover. But that's essential. And then it's crucial to regulate getting to bed on time when you have that time to do that. So you regulate as rapidly as you can back to a normal day-night wake-sleep cycle. But you have to look at the adrenal picture, especially. And that we test for that so we know exactly what to do with each patient. And some people have a lot of work to do, others less. Now, regarding honey. Honey is high fructose. If you cook the honey, enzymes are gone. So it's not going to work. Some people like to use raw Manuka honey, but if they don't tolerate the sugar in it, it's a problem. So I don't know until we evaluate each person how they tolerate honey or fructose. One thing I measure routinely is serum insulin. And many, many people are insulin resistant and don't know it. They're not yet pre-diabetic, diabetic, or stage 3 diabetes, which is called Alzheimer's, which is insulin resistance in the brain. And so we measure that to see what is going on. If they're showing insulin resistance, and the insulin levels go up above 5, by the way, and that's not my reading, that's oncology reading, all right? If it's above 5, they say normal is up to 20 or 25 or 17, depending on what reagents you use. But 5 is really the cutoff above which it's truly insulin resistant. So that's a big deal. So when we see it going above 5, then we start doing things to re-regulate it back down, and there's nutrients to do that. But first and foremost, no sugar, including honey. So it depends on if this person's insulin resistant or not, but I generally have my patients steer away from honey because of the high fructose. And fructose, as I said before, is invited into the liver without the need for insulin, so it causes damage to the liver just like alcohol does in terms of high sugar dysregulation in the liver, causing inflammation, and ultimately even cirrhosis in severe cases. With alcohol, no question. So I'm very careful with that. So I don't experiment with sugar with my cancer patients. Okay. Pardon? So my wife's reminding me there are 2 kinds of sweeteners that we do have patients use where they want sweetener, and that's monk fruit and stevia. Now, I've had 2 patients who are reactive to stevia. It's rare, but I've seen it happen. I've not seen a reaction to monk fruit as yet. I'm asking a company that we work with to actually start measuring that, and I hope they start doing that soon. But there's ways around honey. Now, I've read some of the literature on Manuka honey, raw Manuka honey, as an approach to help heal, but I'm not convinced of that as yet. Yeah. Yes?
I'm wondering, do you have do you have to come to your office to do some of these tests? And the second question is for my brother-in-law. He has been what he called in a dump and slump for the last 10 years. He is at a point where he can no longer run or walk from hip pains and some in his knee. And so he's wondering what protocol would be best for him.
Good. So to reach my office, I'll give you my phone number, and most of my work is done virtually. FaceTime, Skype, Zoom, Google Meets, phone, however a person wants to do that. So if you want to write my number down for my office, it's 541-773-8111. 541-773-8111. And you'll talk to Venny, Bill's wife. She manages my office for me, for which I'm very grateful. And I will see patients Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. I take off the other days to write. And it's all by virtual, by phone, completely. If I need something done, I'll make requests to have them see another physician, to have some kind of evaluation done that needs one-on-one direct, or scoping or things of that nature. But I'll order the labs from where we are, we get them done. All kinds of things. We send the kits, we send the orders and all of that, all over the country. And then, pardon? I'll be happy to. 541-773-8111. Not at all. So that's the best way to reach me, and I'm on the phone in my office all day, 3 days a week. Now, having said that, we've had some patients fly, drive, bus over to our ranch, and I'll see them physically one-on-one. Some come and stay for a few days or a few weeks, depending on the retreats and all of that, and I'll work with them there. I'm also a chiropractor as well as a naturopath, and I do a lot of work in orthopedics. So we have patients come with all kinds of physical problems, mechanical issues that we help them through also. Your second question?
He's no longer able to.
The dump and slump, yes. Thank you. So I'm glad you got that language. So what happens is when we go through that flow state and we dump garbage, if our lifestyle is not conducive to cleansing, then we're more burdened. We just add to the burden and then we go down. We're at a flow for a while, you don't feel it, and then you do another dump, but you're still adding more toxins to the system, and you go down. That's the cesspool I was talking about. So I work with patients all the time around this, by the tens of thousands. I'm not exaggerating, over the decades. So I've held many a hand out of that dump and slump, downhill decline to come back up. We start always with, what do you think? Diet. Clean up the diet. That's what you're feeding the body with. Take out all the pro-inflammatory triggers. It's going to sound like a broken record, I hope. Okay? This is because it's true. So we start with that. How do you feed your body? How do you wash the system? I have a hard time drinking water. Okay? My body's more like a camel. It's genetic. And so I have to think about drinking water. My wife is great about reminding me to drink water, which I appreciate. And so, but water is essential. Exercise is a must, as a person can. If they can't run or hike or jog or bike or swim, then putter. All right? Just get up and do something. Or get on those mini trampolines and just bounce, heel toe. Don't try to jump. Just heel toe, heel toe, heel toe for a minute. If you can't do that, sit in a chair and bring your knee up and bring the other knee up and do that for half a minute. You just start. When you start to exercise, it's a good 6 weeks to condition with whatever state you're in to be able to do more. So stay with it. I've worked with many bodybuilders. Okay? I like to work on weights, work out with weights myself, although never mind. But I've talked to many bodybuilders along the way, and the one thing they talk about is consistency. Consistency, and I really appreciate that. So exercising is a must, and just add what a person can. So I like to do cardio and weight training. You always want to stress the bone. And that requires exercising muscle to stress the bone, including upper body. Many people leave that out. So just start with soup cans, 1 pound weights, simple. Just start with the arms, the shoulders, the chest, the back, okay? Toe raises for the legs. Sit down and get up, sit down and get up. If you can only do it that way for the thighs and the buttocks, that's fine. But just start with something, okay? And then slowly build up. Now, in someone like that, we're going to find all kinds of other issues going on that need attention, so I evaluate those things specifically for that person. But these are more generic and they're effective. But even in the generic, we look at details for that person, especially when they're that debilitated. I've seen many people come back to life. It takes time. Remember we read yesterday that nature upgrades slowly. Give it the time to do that. Untrammeled, it will do its work. It's true. It's true. The Lord wants us to heal. He wants us to be healthy. He wants us to be living witnesses of who He is in us, of His love, His mercy, His grace. Wow. So He has hope. It just requires doing what's needing to be done. Good. Yes.
I have 2 questions. I was recently had a brain scan and also an MRI.
You had a what?
A brain scan.
Brain scan and MRI, okay.
And an MRI, and the brain scan showed that I had little bits of plaque built up in my brain,
Right.
Which was caused by high cholesterol and also high blood pressure.
Right.
And so the doctor put me on some high blood pressure pills and some cholesterol medications.
Right.
And I don't like taking those, but in 8 weeks, he wants me to go back and have blood work. And I'm just wondering what I can do in those 8 weeks to not have to get that down. And if it's reversible in the brain, the plaque and stuff for height that I have.
We know it's reversible throughout the body.
Okay.
Now, here's the deal. So we know that your vascular system has been constricted. So it's putting a lot of back pressure against the heart that it's having to push against, so the blood pressure rises. So it's become less resilient. So nitric oxide is a big issue. Nitric oxide is what allows the vascular system, nitric oxide is what allows the vascular system to become resilient. Right? Now, greens stimulate nitric oxide, but not greens that you swallow by juices, but greens you chew. Chew your greens. Don't just slug them in a green juice. Chew your greens. Because greens have nitrous oxide in them that allow so what happens, you have in the crypts of your tongue, you have bacteria that convert that into a form that's converted to nitric oxide in the stomach. That's how the Lord designed us here. And so if you chew your greens well, thoroughly, then you begin to develop nitric oxide in the stomach that's then available through the body, including the vascular system, to improve resilience of the vascularity. Now, there's other nutrients we use to do that, but greens is the most important. Every meal. Okay, that's one. No flesh foods. Meat, eggs, dairy. No gluten. No sugar. Okay? These are foundational. Please. Now, there's other things we do for blood pressure other than drugs. My license lets me prescribe any drug. So I had to study pharmacy as well as natural medicine. That's how we were trained as naturopaths in Oregon. And so it's a very wide, broad license, so letting me do whatever I need to do. So I help patients come off of drugs. I prescribe them to help them reduce the dosing and come off of them. And I've done that with many patients, especially around heart medication and gut medication. And so with heart medication, there's botanicals or herbal and nutritional preparations that are very effective in lowering blood pressure as we're dealing with improving resilience and nitric oxide formation in the cardiovascular system. So there's ways of managing that, but it's not one size fits all. I look at the specifics of each person, We evaluate what the needs are for each person. We manage dosing for each person botanically, nutritionally, to be able to bring the blood pressure down as we're helping to heal the cardiovascular system. Now, one word on statins. I was talking with a person who had been involved in a lab that does only cardiovascular evaluation. And she sent me a series of papers on statins. She said, "You've got to understand this." I said, "Please do." So she was cautioning me to have my patients come off of statins. All right, there's someone who works in the medical world testing cardiovascular issues thoroughly. And what I found is there are 5 buoyancies of LDL cholesterol. Now, you've heard of good cholesterol, bad cholesterol. That's a misnomer. There's no such thing as bad cholesterol. It's just too much of a good thing. Okay? So you have fats that have to be taken from the liver, where it's metabolized, to the cell to be used, to make up the cell membrane, to make up hormones, to make up aspects of the cell that require fats. So fats are essential, but not in excess. So the LDL cholesterol is just a boat to carry fats from the liver to the cell. HDL, high-density lipoproteins, carries the fats from the cell back to the liver. So it's a circulation pattern of fats being used and spent and being reused and excreted. If you oversaturate fats from the diet, then you oversaturate the LDL cholesterol, and as it's carrying fats to the cells, it actually spills fats along the way in the arterial system where it's being carried out to the cell. And then it causes oxidation because of the high oxygen levels in the artery, leading to hardening of the arteries and plaque formation. The plaque forms so you don't hemorrhage. It's the body's mechanism to keep you alive. But it's in the face of high fats. So you notice there's no hardening of the veins. There's no oxygen. That's been spent. All that's being taken back to CO2. It's hardening the arteries because it's oxidizing fats. So you reduce the fat load. I have my patients that are true cardiac patients stay away from oils and fats of all kinds. If they have anything, maybe a quarter of an avocado or 3 or 4 nuts. No more than a tablespoon of all fats together. Nuts, seeds, nut butter, seed butters, okay? But no seed oils in severe cases. That's important. All right? So high greens, high vegetables, foods you know you can tolerate, beans, whole grains, non-gluten. Cut the fats out or down, but it really needs to be evaluated to know that level that's required for you. And then chew your greens.
Okay, and my second question is, they think that I have Parkinson's disease. Can you tell us about Parkinson's?
I'm happy to. There are several questions up here of the same thing. We treat Parkinson's all over the world. And medically, Parkinson's is treated by carbidopa-levodopa. But here's the deal. Parkinson's is a problem of dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, a brain hormone, that's found in the mesencephalon, in the midbrain, deep in the brain, in a particular place called the substantia nigra, meaning the black substance. Now, we did dissections of brains several years ago in Florida, and we dissected the substantia nigra of a number of brains, and we could tell who was Parkinson and who was not. Because it's not black anymore. It's not nigra or black. Black is the oxidized dopamine in that area of the brain that's responsible for fine motor function. When it's gone, you lose fine motor function capacity and you start developing tremors. And then you can't write, and you can't draw a circle, and you can't walk without a wide gait and stooping, and you can't turn without shuffling. Okay? And it's impossible to get up and down. All right? And then it deteriorates. Then the muscles become rigid, especially muscles of the chest, and then it's harder to breathe. And then you drool. I've worked with many, many cases of Parkinson's, stage 1 to stage 5. Stage 4 and 5, it starts going into dementia and even psychoses. So we want to replenish dopamine back to the midbrain. Everyone knows that. All neurology knows that. The question is how to do that. Now, if you ever had restless leg syndrome, you know what I'm talking about? That's called stage 0 Parkinson's. It's the same issue. It's a dopamine depletion. Okay? And there's different ways of managing that at stage 0. But stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of Parkinson's, it's levodopa, to create dopamine in that midbrain to replenish it. So what we've done is we use what's called amino acid therapy, developed by Dr. Marty Hinz out of Minnesota. And he's my mentor in this world. He's been doing it since 1998. He's a principal researcher. He's written over 20 papers already published, peer-reviewed, and it's a system that's effective. And what we do is we provide levodopa in the form of mucuna pruriens, standardized to 40% levodopa. Mucuna pruriens is a plant, high in levodopa. That's where we get it from. So it's standardized, so we know exactly what to expect with dosing. And then we provide dopamine to the system in graded amounts over the months until we get to the level where it's saturated at an optimal level that the symptoms resolve. I've seen this consistently happen in the first 3 phases, especially of Parkinson's. Even phase 4, I've seen it reduce substantially. Stage 5 is end stage. Okay. So I've watched this happen routinely, and we balance dopamine with serotonin. So this is really critical. And we do that with amino acid support and also other nutrients that are necessary to allow the nutrients to provide to become dopamine and serotonin as cofactors. So there's ways through that. I work with this a lot. Yes?
I have a few questions along the practical line. Like, could you give some examples of shampoo, conditioner, and soap that are appropriate, and maybe a recipe for something like salad dressing?
A recipe for what?
Salad dressing.
I'm going to leave the last question to my wife. So my wife owned and operated a health food store out of Orofino, Idaho for quite a while. And she asked me to help her stock it. So I had to do a ton of research on cosmetics and lotions and soaps and shampoos and toothpaste, etc., deodorants. So we started combing the marketplace to see how are these things made. I learned more than I ever cared to know. And what companies do best. And it turns out there's many companies that really do cater to that. The things you don't want are what are most important. You do not want propylene glycol, antifreeze. You do not want sodium lauryl sulfate. These are neurotoxins. Sodium lauryl sulfate or sodium lauryl sulfate is a foaming agent industrially. So it makes things foam up. But it's a neurotoxin. You do not want bromines or fluorides in these things as well, or parabens we mentioned yesterday. There's other chemicals that I have written down and what I provide patients to avoid in those particular products. Now, some companies are good with some of their products, but not with others. So I checked tons and tons of labels. I spent hours and hours and hours reading labels and then looking up these ingredients online to see what are they. I don't have a PhD in biochemistry. I used to teach it, but I don't have a PhD in it, so I had to go look things up. And so I found that if there's ingredients you can't understand, don't do it. If you recognize it as a substance that's virtually edible, that's okay. Now, there's one company I really like for clean ingredients. It's called Terra Essentials. TERRESSENTIALS. Terra, TERR Essentials.com. They're online. And they're one of the cleanest companies I've ever seen when it comes to skin, mouth, hair care. In fact, they're so clean that they won't produce anything that's got a toxic substance in it. So they have different concepts about, for example, hair care. So you can get online and look at that kind of stuff. They have one of the best deodorants I've ever seen. They're clean, they're effective, as an example. But they have different kinds of things around that. Toothpastes, for example, Jason is a good brand. There's other ones that we've used that are fine also. Just check labels, make sure there's no fluoride and no sugar. That's important. Shampoos and conditioners, it depends on your hair. I only know that from my wife. She's a connoisseur of that, I'm not. I just put shampoo in my head and it does something, that's fine. But I look at the ingredients. So I want to make sure they're clean. So another brand that we've used is Nature's Gate. But check the labels even on those. I'm trying to remember the names. Just go to the health food store and look in their section of skin, mouth, and hair care products. But check the labels. And some products are very good in certain lines, others are not. So I'm just going to ask you to check labels. Good. Okay. In terms of salad dressings, sweetheart, would you like to comment on salad dressings?
Well, it depends if you want a no-fat salad dressing. We had a health retreat patient who was ready for a 6-way bypass on his heart, and he was a walking heart attack waiting to happen. He decided he didn't want to do that because he found out he wouldn't be able to ever play tennis again. So he came and I prayed and prayed because I thought, how can I give him no fats? He was having a hard time eating salads with nothing on it. And in the middle of the night, I woke up and I said, buckwheat, sprouted buckwheat. And buckwheat is gluten-free. So you sprout buckwheat, you won't believe how good this is for a no oil, no fat. And then you put you sprout it, you blend it with water, you put lemon juice in it, you put basil in it, salt, fresh garlic, and it's awesome. And there you can take any nut. I like to use cashew, but you can use any nut. And you can blend that in water and put dill in it. If you want a dill sauce, always put fresh garlic if you can tolerate garlic or a piece of fresh onion. And you blend that and you can add to it any seasoning. Basil, dill are both really good in salad dressings. But you blend it in the blender and you have an Italian dressing. If you want it more like a French dressing, you put a piece of fresh tomato in it. And it's not difficult to make salad dressings. We never touch store-bought salad dressings because they all have vinegar.
Thank you, Ernie.
There's lots of varieties you can make, and you don't have to use oil at all. You use nuts and water.
Great. Go ahead.
I'm an old logger, and I've injured my back quite a few times
Yeah.
by trying to lift too much. A couple of weeks ago, I did it again. And I'm just wondering what your advice might be as far as getting it to quit wanting to spasm and the muscles hold it up. That's how I'm walking.
I get it. So when I had my first part of my practice in Grants Pass, Oregon, it's when they were logging heavily. I saw lots of loggers come in at the end of the day. In fact, some would come in so filthy I'd have to cover them with a sheet so I could work on them. But I respected their vigor and what they had to deal with. So I get it. Now, it depends on where the pain is, what the pain looks like. We actually test it. Low back pain, I'm going to give you kind of the concept. It can vary from a strain of the muscle to a sprain of ligaments to damaging of the sacroiliac joints to disc damage to lumbosacral ligamentous damage. So there's layers that we look at that we actually test orthopedically. So I can't give you an overall view. If it's ligamentous, we use ice and support. If it's muscular, we use heat and massage. Okay? If it's inflammatory, we alternate hot and cold, hot and cold, hot and cold. Now, most of my patients do best with just alternating hot and cold to start. So I can give you that as a concept where you go 3 minutes hot, 1 minute cold, 7 cycles, 28 minutes, and then go to bed. Okay? That will reduce inflammation and reduce muscle spasming at the same time. It's called revulsion therapy, so you're moving blood in and out, in and out, in and out, as well as lymph, to clean that tissue and to reduce the inflammation at the same time and relax the tissue. So hot-cold applications helps immensely. I'd have to examine you to tell you what else to consider, because there's layers of complexity that we need to distinguish as to what's what. I appreciate the question. I wish I had a table I could work on you up here and I can tell you exactly what to do.
Thank you.
Not at all.
My brother was diagnosed about 18 months ago with that, and we
With
don't
what?
Psoriasis,
Ah,
and we don't seem to be getting any further along in treatment here. We just keep reapplying the same things, and we're not getting anywhere.
right. So psoriasis is a gut problem. And people treat psoriasis as a skin issue because that's the target organ, but it starts in the gut. And there's certain kinds of bacteria in the gut that can trigger psoriasis. So we start with diet. We clean up the diet. Sometimes I'll actually measure through a GI map, it's called, the gut issues to look at what is the mix of microbes in the gut. Are there pathogens? Are there viruses? Are there fungi? Are there bacteria that don't belong there? Are bacteria that do belong there that aren't? We see dysbiosis, it's called, a disruption of the gut flora. So we start by cleaning up the gut. There's other nutrients we use to feed the gut very effectively. My favorite's called GI Replenish by a company called Metagenics. They've done an excellent job in that protocol. We use probiotics where appropriate. But we start with the diet. We clean it up. Take out every single pro-inflammatory and toxic trigger to the gut. That's crucial. I've seen many psoriatic cases clear up. Now I'm going to share with you one story. I had a case of psoriasis years and years ago. I did a weekend seminar for my patients to deal with their strategies of survival. Just to deal with mental issues, emotional issues, psychological and spiritual issues. And this one gentleman was there with his wife, and they were not doing well. And he had intense anger, intense rage. So we worked through his process. He was able to just forgive. Now he was covered in his arms and legs with psoriasis, large patches. He came in the next day psoriasis free. If I didn't see it, I wouldn't believe it. Psoriasis free from forgiveness. Let the Lord do his work. Amen, truly. Meanwhile, clean up the gut. But look deeper. Look deeper. In any physical condition, look deeper. What's the status of the heart? What are we holding on to that doesn't serve us? We talked about dump and jump. What do you want to dump that's not serving you? Anything that's carnal, anything of this worldly world, this worldly life. Any of the issues that we deal with of anger and resentment and bitterness and grief and the things that weigh so heavily on us. I tell my patients, you can't heal until you've forgiven your parents. You've healed from your childhood. That's the one downside. We all have parents. And we all learn to speak and communicate with them as our teachers. Lord help us. Okay? You can see why we keep degenerating one generation after the next. We all have parents. We're degenerating genetically. We're degenerating relationally. So who's going to stop the process? We are. By healing in the Lord. Pray. Have the Lord show you what's going on in your heart that's triggering these responses in the body. It's not separate from how we think, how we feel, from our relationship with God. He wants us to be healthy. He wants us to be whole in Christ. Jesus was perfectly healthy because his thoughts were continually trained on his Father. Remember we talked about our cells being antenna and picking up all the thoughts that we have affecting our physiology? If our thoughts are trained on the Lord, our cells will always train toward that and toward health. Yeah. Yes?
You have a white notebook paper that I sent up there.
Oh.
And
Which
along
one?
with that, I forgot to add one of the symptoms or diagnosis was MGUS.
With what?
MGUS, monoclonal gammonopathy unsignificant.
Okay. Which one is yours?
The big white notebook paper.
Okay. This one?
Yes.
Oh, this was the Meniere's labyrinthitis?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. And congestive heart failure?
Yes.
Okay. Lung and heart clearly with CHF. Pardon? Oh, okay. The question reads, Meniere's and labyrinthitis and congestive heart failure. My husband's had head pressure. It goes away when he lays down. He's a lung and heart patient since 2013, 2014. Vertigo since May of 2018, thank you. He lost all hearing in his left ear, 20% loss in the right ear, balance issues and tremors, Question is, can any of the medications be causing his head pressure? Can the pressure be causing his tremors? When he lays down, the pressure goes away. Can't take Parkinson's meds, no headache at all. And the list of medications are warfarin, carvedilol, omeprazole, atorvastatin, furosemide, losartan, and betahistine.
And there's more. I forgot some.
I have no doubt.
Yes.
Some patients live on drugs. I call them walking pharmacies. Okay? And we help them become walking unpharmacies. So several points. There's a lot going on. There's a complex case. I worked with each one of these. Now, labyrinthitis, Meniere's, is a vestibular issue. And it's an inflammation in the vestibular apparatus. Now, the vestibular apparatus is in the ears, well, deep to the ears, in the temporal lobes, or the temporal bones of the skull. And they're like a gyroscope. All right? You have these patterns that are orthogonal like this, so that any way we move, our body can right itself and keep our eyes level to the horizon. It's an incredible design, incredible design. I wish I had time to just tell you the design. It's just exquisitely beautiful. But the way it works is equally exquisite. So it keeps us oriented to the horizon and able to determine where we are in space. So with labyrinthitis, he can't do that. So vertigo becomes a problem. Now, one thing I find with vertigo and labyrinthitis is not just inflammation, but commonly trauma to the skull. And many people have had head trauma or whiplashes causing head trauma that cause a disruption in the bones of the skull. We've been able to help many people with vertigo issues by reorienting the bones of the skull or reorienting the vestibular mechanism with exercises to orient them properly. And the Epstein maneuver is what most people do, and it works really well. You can look it up online. I won't describe how to do it. It's called the Epstein maneuver. And it's a way of orienting the crystals in the vestibular mechanism to orient them properly, because they've been disrupted. Now, the other thing I find is cranial distortions. When people have head trauma or whiplashes, or they fall down and bonk themselves, and many people have hurt themselves and don't even know the extent of the damage. We find that the bones of the skull and face are actually disrupted. Now, there's been incredible research in osteopathy in the cranial field. And they've developed an understanding of how this works. You have 22 bones that make up the face and the skull. They're constantly in motion. Now, you can't see it, hopefully, but your head is continually expanding and contracting several times a minute. It's called the primary respiration. It's assisting the pumping of fluid, cerebrospinal fluid, through the entire central nervous system. And the design is fantastically beautiful. And it starts with how you chew, how you bite. When you bite down on the first molars, you equilibrate right there. Those forces go up 2 buttresses that are designed in the skull by the Lord. These buttresses are force directors that take the resultant mass or resultant force of biting to the center of mass of the skull, distributes it down the occipital condyles, down the neck, down the mid-back, down the low back, down the sacrum, out the hips to the feet and toes, so that when you bite down, you distribute that crushing weight through your entire body so you don't crush your face. It's incredible. Now, if it's disrupted with bad teeth, for example, or head trauma, now you start distributing those forces unequally down the entire spine, and the skull itself starts to distort. The way it first started to distort is at birth. We're born with a mutation, an LOA position, left occiput anterior position. I used to do OB in my first part of my career, and so we learned this a lot. And when you're born, you nutate and you come out this way. You torque. You corkscrew out one way then the other. And it causes a torsion in the skull, causing the skull to go to a left torsion, and it stays that way. And then the teeth can't come in straight, and the jaw can't be properly maneuvered, and the cranium is distorted. And now the brain isn't functioning optimally. So I work with many, many, many newborns to get the cranial bones back to an optimal position, a symmetrical position. And I can tell you many, many stories, but I'll leave those out right now. With adults, older children and adults with head trauma, And I work with many kids that bonk their heads routinely until they can walk without falling. And we work with them a lot to get their cranium functioning properly. In adults after trauma, we do the same thing. Work with them to get the bones of the skull and face resulting in a symmetrical positioning. Sometimes I have to work with orthodontics to get it to stabilize that way. So in someone like this, I'm going to encourage that being evaluated. That's what I'm getting at. So you want that looked at. Now with congestive heart failure, I remember one old gentleman I worked with CHF, congestive heart failure, and his BNP was really high, being natriuretic peptide, indicative of congestive heart failure. And I said, okay, we're going to evaluate what's going on. So I said, okay, here's the protocol I want you to do. We're going to wean you off your medication. He came in the next week, he says, I'm done. I said, done with what? He said, I flushed all my meds down the toilet that day. I said, well, that's one way to wean. He way outlived his prognosis. And I'm sure he did it because he was ornery enough to do that. I love patients like that. He had a will to want to heal. And so what we did with him is establish the nutrition to deal with the inflammation of the heart and the strength of the heart and vascular system to allow that to recover to the extent that it could. So there's ways of managing with congestive heart failure. I have many cases right now of congestive heart failure that people are doing quite well. But they're eating properly, they're getting the right nutrients into the system to rebuild that whole system. So all is not lost. Can't hear you.
I said I wanted to tell the rest of the story about
hear you.
the man who came that that needed a 6-way bypass. It's not on, they say. I wanted to tell the rest of the story about the man who came and needed a 6-way bypass. That I made him the buckwheat, no oil salad dressing. His arteries all cleared. His wife came with him so she could learn how to cook oil-free, and everything cleared. He only had 20% in one of the avenues, but he got so much better. But it took him about 5 to 8 months, and he came to our health retreat center that was in Oregon that we've sold, and he came out of his car, and I said, oh no, did his wife get a new husband? Did she leave him? Did he die? What happened? But it was him. He had just lost about 70 pounds, and he was a new man. It was the most amazing thing. So he came to learn the lifestyle and the method at the retreat, but he carried on. So if he ever let go of that, he's going to go right back. So.
Yeah. I want to address one other point of this question first. So the balance issues are related to the vestibular system. That's when the cranial work and upper cervical work becomes really important. So I'm going to encourage that. So if you can find someone on here that does that work, do that, please. At least get it evaluated properly. The other is regarding the tremoring, that he's not able to tolerate Parkinson's medication. So Parkinson's is treated typically levodopa, carbidopa. Levodopa was developed in 1976 to add to carbidopa so people wouldn't get nauseous. About 52% of our Parkinson's cases, when they start that process, will experience nausea because of an imbalance between serotonin and dopamine. Now, the medical world doesn't realize that. So they created a drug to deal with the nausea, but the problem with that drug is it depleted dopamine and serotonin and B6 and L-cysteine necessary to properly treat Parkinson's. And they increased the death rate of Parkinson's by 6 times since then, 600%. So we take people off of the carbidopa, levodopa, just use levodopa from a plant, so balance it with serotonin, and people can ordinarily tolerate that quite well. And then we titrate the dosing to the level where it's necessary to optimize for that person's brain so symptoms can resolve. So I'm going to encourage that approach also for him. But I didn't want to leave that untouched. But it makes sense why when he lays down is better, but he can't get up. I suspect because of the vestibular distortion. So that needs to be addressed. there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. Good. Just talk because I can't see you.
My question is,
there you are.
there's at least 2 people that I know of that have post-polio syndrome.
Right.
And one has been suffering with it for about 20 years, excruciating pain in the shoulder and back. And they did hydrotherapy when they were 7, and so full use of the extremities, but anyway, yeah.
So it's called PPMA, post-polio muscular atrophy. My mom had polio when she was 2. So I was raised by a mom with polio. And she recovered after multiple surgeries to her ankle. She walked with a limp, and eventually she was wheelchair bound. And she died with PPMA. So the respiratory system gave out. So you want to do work to relax the musculature. Now, Mom's diet was improved, but not optimal. And that was problematic. So again, like I've said before, remove all the pro-inflammatory triggers. Massage the musculature. Have them exercise to the extent that they can and stretch on a regular basis. Move. That's a key. Because with post-polio cases, the brain has lost connection to that part of the body with any rigor because of the polio itself. So you want to establish new neural networks to the extent that you can. So that's called retraining the body physically. And that means movement patterns. And do the movements that are the hardest to do until they get easy to do. It doesn't take long, but it takes persistence, like every 5 hours, every 4 hours. Do the same routine again and again and again, 4 or 5 times in a day. Every 3 hours if you have to. But not to the point of exhaustion. You stop short of that so the body's got energy to do it again and again and again through the day. And these are things that can be learned, but we assess each case to know what are appropriate things to do. So I'm going to suggest working with a PT, for example, or someone like that, that can show you stretches and movements that support what needs to be done to regenerate those systems that have been degenerative. But start on the brain. Neurodegeneration is a big issue. So again, it's a complex case. There's a lot to it. It requires a very specific, directed, targeted evaluation to know how to best manage that. But there's things to be considered that probably haven't been. Good.
I've heard a lot about root canals and how bad they are. Have you dealt with that at all?
Oh, yes.
Okay, and what do we do about it?
My first comment is heavy sigh. So root canals are sadly controversial. I had one dentist in Oakland, California that was brilliant. He'd worked with a physicist out of UC Berkeley to create a laser system that let him do root canals successfully to make sure that the canal was completely sterile. The problem is with root canals, the canal is not sterile, there's still bacteria. They then plug it with a calcium plug or a metal plug, and the infection continues, and then what happens is the root continues to infect, eventually infecting the bone, creating osteonecrosis, damage to the bone itself, degradation or death to the bone. And they have to go through surgery to clean out the dead bone, and then they get the tooth pulled anyway. So it has to be done properly. Now, I'm still hunting for dentists around here that know how to do that. Very few dentists really understand how to create a sterile environment in a root canal. If they don't, they're safer to pull the tooth, remount the bone, clean it very well, make sure it's antiseptic completely, lay down new bone, and put in an implant. Those are the options. But if you can have a dentist that can work with you very successfully, that knows how to do laser therapy, especially to clean out the bone in the root, that's crucial. If they can do that, then they can likely do it successfully. Just talk. Oh, there, okay.
I have, for over a year now, I have problems with my hands breaking out. I went to a skin doctor and they said it was dermatitis, and it's and sometimes
I missed one part. So on your hands, something?
They break out and they hurt, and the nerves hurt underneath, and sometimes they ooze liquid.
Okay.
And it swells up and it
All
breaks.
right.
The skin is so dry it just cracks open and sometimes bleeds. And all they offered me was steroids, so I took them for a while, and then I threw them in the garbage. So I can't take pharmaceuticals.
Right.
So I have, I'm a vegan, and I've worked really hard about praying and forgiving everybody and trying to get all the sin out of my life, and all that kind of thing. So I'm kind of stuck here.
So is the oozing fluid like an amber color?
No, it's
or is it
clear. Yeah. It's
And
not, it doesn't ooze all the time. It's not right now, but
Okay.
once in a while it does.
Has it never been diagnosed as eczema?
I suppose it's eczema. I don't know.
Okay.
But-
The skin gets rough, dry, cracked?
Yeah.
All right. That's not uncommon with eczema. Now, the skin is an organ.
Mm-hmm.
The skin is downstream of the kidneys and lymphatics, which is downstream of the liver. It starts in the liver, classically. I treat many. I get it. I get it.
Things.
So in something like that, I measure literally the chemistries themselves to know what's actually going on. So you must cut out all the pro-inflammatory triggers. I work with many cases like this over the years. The worst case I ever worked with was a 2-year-old, covered head to toe with these kinds of lesions that itched, and he was miserable, a 2-year-old. So we tested his blood around foods. We found about 20 foods he could eat, that he could eat. His dad was an ER doc, didn't know what to do. I don't even know how they found me. Never met the kid, all by phone. We tested him. They changed his diet. You know how long it took for the skin to clear up? 3 weeks. They then went to a pediatrician. He said, the guy's all wet. Eat whatever you want. I said, okay. You know what happened? Came right back. They called me up in a panic. I said, you know what to do. We assessed it further. This kid's now like in his teens. Beautiful skin, smart. He did great. But he cleaned up the diet and kept it that way. So, remember, no gluten. No, you're a vegan. No sugar. No sugar. Sugar is going to be pro-inflammatory. It's going to mess up the liver. It's going to make it inflamed. So we actually measure what's going on. You can do all kinds of things, but the diet's not right, you can't fully recover. So those are things we actually evaluate to know what's to be done. We use very specific protocols to manage that. They're effective. They work. That's why we do them. So I'm going to encourage that for you, but no sugar, no refined carbs, no fruit juices, no jams, no jellies. That's crucially important.
Thank you.
Good.
I was wondering what your opinion is on using charcoal, like drinking it during the week,
Right.
and how often, and if you could speak something about tachycardia.
Sure. So activated charcoal we use on occasion. Now, activated charcoal will sequester nutrients, especially minerals. So if you take it a lot, you're actually depleting the body of minerals that you can't assimilate because you've sequestered them in the charcoal. So we do it carefully. I'll use activated charcoal if a person has a big gas problem, for example, because it sequesters the gas also. If they ate something that was toxic to their body to get it out of the system, or detoxing heavy metals, for example, we want to sequester that at times, not all the time through the day, because you want to be able to assimilate nutrition as well. And with charcoal, you can't do that efficiently. So I'm very careful with the use of activated charcoal. I like it as a topical poultice because it draws beautifully. I've seen it draw all kinds of things, including water on joints and things of that nature as well as lesions of the skin or bites and poisons and things of that nature. Now, tachycardia. It means racing heart. And there's different things behind tachycardia. And commonly it's a sympathetic overdrive. The nervous system is in overdrive, so the heart keeps on going. It depends if it's going into an AFib situation or worse, a VFib, but an AFib more commonly. So I want to know what else is going on behind the tachycardia. It's not for no reason. So that's when we do a very thorough cardiac evaluation and nutritional evaluation and chemistry evaluation to see what's going on behind that. But just realize it doesn't happen for no reason. So we look for the why behind it. Sometimes I refer to cardiology to get a full workup of an echocardiogram stress evaluation to see are there cardiac issues directly. I tell my patients, just get the evaluation, don't take the drugs. I just want the report back so I know what's going on. And then we deal with that botanically and nutritionally most commonly. Okay. So that's a larger question. It's a symptom that's indicative of many other kinds of things. So I look at what's behind it. We don't treat tachycardia. We treat what's driving it. Always reason from cause to effect. Yeah.
About a year ago, I had surgery for my bowel. I had an obstruction in the bowel, and it didn't go well. It didn't seal up, so they had to. I was bleeding out. They had to do it again. But after all that ordeal, the Lord has pulled me through, which I'm so thankful for. But I ended up going back into the surgery, into hospital, because I had multiple blood clots. And they put me on a blood thinner, which I'd been refusing for years because I have AFib. But is there something else I can do? I'm still on a small dose, and I don't want to be.
So what caused the bowel problem in the first place?
They said that it was pancreatic cells that had collected together and closed off the top part. And they tested it for cancer, and they said no. So they said it was probably something I had from youth, but I don't know.
So I've never heard, that doesn't make sense yet. So pancreatic cells closed off a duct?
That's what they told me. It was a pancreatic mass.
But not a tumor?
They didn't
mass
call it.
is called a tumor, pardon?
Yeah, probably. It must have been some sort of tumor. I'm not sure.
But it wasn't malignant. It was benign? All right. Did it close off the duct from the pancreas to the duodenum, the small intestine?
It was right up by the stomach opening.
Yeah, it's in the duodenum. It's called the ampulla fautor. And that's the emptying point of the pancreas into the small intestine or the duodenum. So the pancreas dumps its enzymes to break down proteins, fats, and starches, and it dumps a mammoth amount of sodium bicarbonate to neutralize the acid chyme coming out of the stomach. That's what the pancreas does. It's called its exocrine function. And so when that's blocked off, you can't digest food very effectively, and you can't neutralize the acid of the stomach effectively, so now you get too much of an acid into the small intestine, which can then damage the colon. Okay? So, all right.
But it's the blood clots that I was worried about.
I get that all happened afterwards. So then you had the surgery, the resection.
Twice. They resectioned it
because
twice.
they never took care of the problem in the first place that was driving it. So you kept having the same problem over and over and over.
I didn't. It came up very suddenly. I didn't know I had any problem.
Granted, and that's remember that dump and jump process? You get to a threshold and all of a sudden you're symptomatic. So if you continue what got you sick, you're going to get worse symptoms. So we reverse that process with a lifestyle and diet, a way of being that is for healing. So again, this is a complex situation. When things don't add up, I start digging deeper to find out, well, what's really going on here? So you're describing the acid pattern in the small intestine, and it's going to mess up the colon as well, and digestion. So now you're going to become nutrient deficient at the same time. There's foods that are not being properly metabolized or digested properly, so they're not being assimilated well, so you go into malnutrition issues from that also. Then you start dealing with, you said AFib?
I've had that for off and on a lot.
Okay. So, there's cardiac issues also, which is an electrical signal problem classically, but not for no reason. I've seen AFib recover. Conservatively, I've seen it not recover, and I've seen it have to go into ablations and things of that nature when people don't do what I ask them to do often. So, again, we look at the details of specifics in this case. This is not a one-size-fits-all. So you've got several things that are unique to your body that require attention to how you digest food, how you metabolize, and how you manage heart function. Now, you're taking some kind of a Equus or something of that, Eliquis or something of that nature.
Eliquis.
Yeah. So you're taking something to thin out the blood so that you don't clot, because with AFib, what happens is there's a region in the heart that becomes sequestered, so blood circulates there and can then clot. So to stop the clotting from happening, you use an anti-clotting system. So we also measure D-dimer and fibrinogen index in the blood to see how much clotting is going on. And then we do things also to remove the clots, not just stop them from forming. So the Eliquis stops them from forming, but it doesn't take them down after they're formed. We use other enzymes in the nutritional world to actually break them down after the fact. And lumbar kinase is one of the strongest ones we use. But I first measure D-dimer to see, is that what's going on? Because if that's the case, then you're forming fibrin or scar tissue on the inside of your arteries, which limits oxygen to the cell, including to the brain. So these are critical things we measure to see what's appropriate for you. So I'm going to encourage that kind of evaluation for you. But you're describing a complex pattern that hasn't been fully dealt with. Yeah.
Dr. Saeed, thank you so much for your time. My wife has a question for you. I'll ask it. She says, my husband has developed snoring for the last 2 years. Is there anything that you can do to help him? Please help him.
Now, first, does she have just one husband?
She just has one husband.
Pardon?
She just has one husband.
Okay, good. Just
yes.
checking.
The second question is related, is my question, as I'm trying to deal with that issue. What is a reasonable cleanse protocol? Because in the jump or slump paradigm, it seems that if you do it wrong, if you do a cleanse wrong, you seem to be slumping when you're wanting to jump.
Yes. I've had the experience of my experiment in my own body as well, early on. Like I said, we've developed more humane ways in the last 50 years. So let me address your wife's husband issue. So snoring is a big deal. And snoring is classically a reduction in airspace in the nasopharynx. So the space behind the palate deep into the pharynx and the upper trachea starts to compress, typically from fat. So as people gain weight, that's not an uncommon place to compress. So now you reduce the area involved for air to get through, and snoring is a common result. The other thing that can happen is from the jaw. If the jaw retrudes or pulls back, it does the same thing. It reduces the airway capacity or airway space or volume in the nasopharynx back here. So we reduce the fat. I don't care if you appear not big, but if there's a fat pad that forms, you can even see it on an x-ray, then we reduce that by dietary changes, especially some nutrition. If it's a jaw issue, I do cranial and maxillofacial work to open that up. And if need be, we also use a dental appliance. There's many of them in the marketplace now that are designed to open up the jaw to increase the airway capacity by over 200%. And that's been actually approved by Medicare because it's successful instead of a CPAP, for example. So that's direct evaluation in both cases. But snoring doesn't have to be persistent. And I've seen that routinely. So you can tell your wife's husband that that's an option. Okay. Now, the other, again, remind me the...
So what is a reasonable...
Detoxing, thank you. So, again, I evaluate the details of the patient. If I find liver congestion, not from elevated liver enzymes necessarily, or reduced liver enzymes, but from hormones that are not fully conjugating down the steroid cascade, that's not uncommon. For example, you create cholesterol is what makes all the steroid hormones. You need cholesterol to do that in the adrenals. So cholesterol makes pregnenolone, that makes DHEA and progesterone. Progesterone makes aldosterone and cortisol, and DHEA makes testosterone and estrogens. So all that comes from cholesterol. So we find there's a normal conjugation or breaking down to get that whole cascade fully resolved, so the body has the full complement of the hormones that it requires for adaptation and stress. In many, many cases, we find that it doesn't work that way, that certain hormones tend to accumulate and the ones downstream don't form properly because the liver is congested and also the gut. So we deal with liver decongesting through that process, especially phase 2 conjugation, it's called phase 2 conjugation, some call it phase 3, but it's phase 2 conjugation of the liver to provide nutrients to the liver that support that detoxing. The protocol I like most is by a company called Apex that makes a product called Clearvite. And there's different forms of it depending on the needs. And it is a nutrient base that provides the nutrients for the liver to detoxify fully. Now, some patients are ultra sensitive. They can't take nutrients like that. So then I have them start with something as simple as milk thistle, silymarin, and dandelion, even as a tea, to start that process. But take out the sugars. Take out the sugars. Take out the flesh foods. Take out the dairy, the eggs. Take out the gluten. Take out the things we've been talking about. Measure the food reactivities to know what foods don't work that are causing congestion of the liver and the gut. Now, it turns out that the gut is equally involved in metabolism as the liver. And that's newer in research that we're finding now. So we make sure the gut is clean as well as the liver. So detoxing has to involve both. But it starts with a proper diet. Now, when patients come to the ranch and they go through the retreats, we put them on a raw vegan diet. That's the quickest way to cleanse. Actually, the very quickest way, I tried this on myself. I don't recommend it. In the beginning, I read this little booklet called Arnold Ehret's Mucusless Diet Healing System. I was a kid. I had studied nothing. I read this book. I thought, that sounds interesting. I'll try it. Eat and drink nothing for 2 days. First day, I did okay. Second day, I became an earthquake and a volcano. Everything exploded for an hour, and I felt fantastic. I cleaned out mucus from everything you can imagine, and then some. But I was 22, and I thought, wow, I've never felt this good in my entire 22 years that I remembered. And then I started cleansing the body. I didn't do that anymore. I've never recommended it. It's way too much. Like I said, we learned the hard way. But there's ways of fasting, modified fasting, juice fasting, green juice fasting, that starts the process of cleansing. And then we add to that as we need to, depending on the person's needs, other approaches with foods and nutrition to cleanse the gut and cleanse the liver. Now, fiber is also essential for the gut and the liver. So fiber-rich foods, especially beans, extremely high in fiber, leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables. These are also high in protein, as it turns out in the plant world. So those are high fiber foods as well. When you take the fiber, it's cleansing the gut, but it also cleanses the liver. How? Through bile. The bile is in the liver, made by the liver and collected in the gallbladder, and is dumped with fats in the diet. When the bile is dumped, 95% of that bile recirculates back from the gut to the liver. It's called the enterohepatic circulation. That 95% of the bile goes back to the liver, cleanses the liver, takes up more garbage, and reposits in the gallbladder, waiting for the next dump of the gallbladder. But it's the fiber that cleanses the bile. If you don't have enough fiber, guess what happens to the bile? It doesn't get cleansed, exactly. It stays more and more congested. So now you congest the liver and congest the gallbladder. Now you have this vicious cycle in that circulation, damaging the liver and gallbladder further and further and further. Then you end up with more gallbladder sludge, thickening the gallbladder wall because it's inflamed. Then people get their gallbladders whacked out, so to speak. Okay? Carefully. So we've reversed that in many patients facing gallbladder surgery by cleaning up the gallbladder, cleaning up the liver, cleaning up the bile, cleaning up the diet, and causing that enterohepatic circulation to function the way the Lord designed it. So these are all detoxing approaches. So I measure specifics for the individual to see what they can and cannot tolerate, then we tailor it for them. I've not seen a one-size-fits-all. But to start, at least beans, leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, dandelion, milk thistle. Start with that.
Thank you.
Good.
Hi, my question is about more of a general health and optimal health after you've already taken the steps for changing the diet and getting rid of the inflammatory things.
Mm-hmm.
So would you recommend any kind of supplementation like omega-3s, NAC? That would be part one. And part two would be about protein. So if somebody's big into athletics and weight training and wants extra protein, is any kind of, say, supplementary, like a pea protein or a brown rice protein recommended, or should that be avoided?
I appreciate the questions. So the answer to the first question is don't stop. Consistency. Keep the diet clean. No tolerance, okay? Don't compromise. Sin is not allowed in heaven. There's no compromise in heaven. Start here. Don't compromise by sinning against your own temple. So keep the body cleaned, keep it healthy with the proper diet. Where supplementation is appropriate, make sure that's properly managed and you know what the needs are. Don't guess. All right? So when you ask about nutrition, and by the way, keeping the body fit is part of that process. So weight training, cardio are both important. And if you're bodybuilding, you're increasing muscle mass, you're going to need protein to support that. But many bodybuilders way overdo protein and blow out their liver and kidneys. Okay? So I don't encourage high protein diets, like the paleo concept, which is insane. Eating every 2 hours with mammoth amounts of proteins and high fats makes no sense. 60% of the population is not going to do well with that because they can't metabolize the fats. So they end up with high cholesterol levels, high LDL cholesterol. So if you're working out, great. Work out regularly. Get the proteins you need. Generally, the maximum would be 20 to 25 grams per meal. Most people, 15 to 18. Heavy bodybuilders, bigger people, 20, 25 maximum. Maximum. Okay? If you have to use pea protein or garbanzo protein or whatever to augment the diet, fine. In smoothies, for example, I have patients do that periodically that need protein. We measure that. If their albumin levels are low, their globulins are low, then they need protein. They're not metabolizing it. So then you make sure they're getting the protein and they're also able to digest and assimilate the protein. For many people, they're low in hydrochloric acid, low in digestive enzymes or pancreatic enzymes. So you provide those so the body can start assimilating, digesting and assimilating the protein. So getting it's one thing, but taking it into the body and using it is another. So you want to make sure that everything is being managed along that pathway of getting the protein, digesting the protein, assimilating the protein, and metabolizing the protein. So there's things we do to accommodate that with hydrochloric acid in the stomach, digestive enzymes affecting the stomach and small intestine, sometimes probiotics, especially in the gut, to support that process. Make sure the protein that you get is easy assimilable. For some patients, when we start, we use pre-digested proteins, amino acids, free amino acids, so they don't have to worry about digesting that they can't do to get the amino acids into the system to make into protein. So it depends on the weakness of the person, their chemistries, their needs specifically, and then we tailor it to that. But that's the concept. Good, thank you.
I have a question. Is this on? Yeah. It's somebody in their 20s, a young man who has, he was in the past diagnosed with, what's it called? Hodgkin's lymphoma. That's in remission.
Cause what?
Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Okay.
That's in remission. He had chemo, which caused ulcerative colitis, and that's evidently healed at this point. But currently, he is constantly starving, even with large meals, having indigestion, poor memory, crashes completely energy-wise, getting dizzy within a few hours if doesn't eat right away. Right. And this is not a new problem. Evidently, even before cancer, when he was younger, he didn't have a lot of energy and
sure.
Yeah.
How old is he now?
27. 28.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
27.
All right. I've worked with Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's lymphomas and Burkitt's lymphomas. I'm sorry he's having to go through it. That's a tough one. And the gut is a big issue. And it sounds like the gut was an issue before. He was not regulating glucose effectively before, if he's having crashes when he doesn't eat. So you want to regulate the insulin. That's measurable. That's doable right away. There's specific nutrients we do to do that. Secondly, again, broken record, get the pro-inflammatory foods out of the diet. There's certain nutrients we use to reduce the inflammation in the gut. The most important is called isatis. It's a botanical, and I like one from one particular company called Isatis Cooling, and they're still making it they couldn't get it for a while, and that was a real problem. But I've seen that reduce inflammation even in Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, or mucus colitis, or mucus ulcerative colitis. And you take one morning, one evening to get the inflammation down in the gut. That's crucial. Then get the diet so it's not triggering inflammation further. no sugar, 4 hours between meals, stabilize it by protein in the diet. That stabilizes sugar levels to the brain. It regulates it. So, and then make sure the adrenals are being treated properly to regulate cortisol, to regulate glucose to the brain. These are critical issues. So he's got a gut to heal, he has an adrenal system to heal, he has an immune system to heal, all right, and a brain to recover.
A certain order that you should
Pardon?
Is there an order to do that, or you
Yes,
just do it all at once?
all at once. They're connected. That's how the Lord made us. We may study them independently, but we understand them as one system. They're wholly interconnected. So there's a lot of work to do there, but there's things to evaluate and manage properly.
I have a friend, and she's watching right now. She got COVID, and now she is a long hauler for COVID. She has inflammation in her heart, the fluid on the heart. Her lungs are a mess. Her memory is going. She can't work, and no one will seem to address it as a real thing, and she's having problems.
Okay. How old is she?
She's about 55.
So she's a kid. All right.
Yeah.
That's what I call it. If they're younger than I am, they're a kid. If they're older than I am, they're just an older kid. So, again, I'm sorry to hear it. So COVID is a very charged issue. There's peptides in the COVID issue that we're only starting to now understand that affect different organs differently. It's not a single peptide spike protein. There's 8 of them that we're aware of. And in the vaccine, it's even more concentrated. Did she take the vaccine? No. Good. Good. So here's the deal. There's clotting issues and inflammatory issues in the lungs and the heart. That's what she's contending with. And other organs as well, including the brain. So she must measure the D-dimer. Write that down. If she's listening, please write this down. Measure your D-dimer. If the D-dimer is above normal, she wants to take lumbrokinase. Lumbrokinase is the strongest kinase we know in nature to break down the clots after the fact. Clean up the diet. The nutrition that's essential is quercetin, wormwood or artemisinin, zinc. Those are both zinc ionophores to get zinc into the cell. That's crucial. High-dosing vitamin C, and acetylcysteine to get glutathione into the lungs and the gut. These are crucial. All right? Sometimes we'll use even liposomal C and liposomal glutathione to get them rapidly into the cell because the liposomal form is fat soluble to get into the cell quickly, almost like an IV. So these are crucial nutrients for the system. Also, check the 25-hydroxy vitamin D. Just have her check the blood vitamin D. If the D is low, make sure she's taking the vitamin D necessary to have that level between 60 and 80 on the blood testing. If it's below 60, it's too low. They'll say above 30 is normal. Yes, but it's not optimal. They say 30 to 100. That's nonsense. It's 60 to 80. You want it in that range. So take the vitamin D levels, vitamin D amounts necessary to bring the D levels in the blood between 60 and 80. That's critical. Okay? So these nutrients are essential to deal with this long haul issue. We work with this a lot. I didn't hear that. Yeah, I prefer the liposomal or fat soluble C, as my wife is reminding again. But it's a way to get the C into the cell quickly. So those are essential nutrients to manage this. So, and there's other things to do depending on what else is going on with their chemistries, but those are foundational to deal with the long haul COVID issue, so-called long haul. She's just dealing with the effects of peptides that have never been resolved. So there's a lot to that one. But start at least with that.
The vaccine.
Say it again, please.
Is it the same if you've had the vaccine?
Yes and no. It's the same and there's more. If the vaccine's there, add in Pectisol C, which is a pectin approach to deal with phase 1 conjugation. You need higher amounts of glutathione to transport those toxins from the cell to the liver You have to deal with detoxing the liver. I use the Clearbite with many patients that have had the vaccine. You must detox the liver. And also you must take magnesium. The form of magnesium I prefer is called dimagnesium malate. And you take that at bedtime, up to 500 milligrams. So those are essentials also if you've had the vaccine, but clean up the diet and don't get the boosters. It's called dimagnesium malate. Dimagnesium malate. It's readily available. We use companies that specialize in that.
What would you recommend for both dry and wet macular degeneration?
Oh boy. That's a tough one. All right. So there's nutrients for the eye health that are essential. Zeaxanthin and lutein are among the most important. And there's formulas we use with people with wet and dry macular degeneration. I work with ophthalmologists who are catching on to that and catching on to the nutritional components essential for that. There's also procedures being developed in ophthalmology to deal with that more and more effectively. So I'd refer to a functional ophthalmologist, as I would call that person, to deal with that in concert with the nutrition we would provide. That's a complex one. So there's many aspects to it that we measure.
May I ask one other question in relation to that? When I was first diagnosed with macular degeneration,
right,
a person told me about a person who was told by an optometrist when they were diagnosed with macular degeneration not to worry about it, to go home and eat a handful of sunflower seeds every day, raw sunflower seeds.
Right.
And I figured, what can that hurt? It's a nutritious thing.
Right.
And I did, and the next time I went back, they could not find any macular
awesome.
degeneration.
Yeah.
Anyway, I still take them to this day. Recently, an ophthalmologist thought they saw just a bit, but this was years and years ago.
Right.
Anyway, so I just am praising God for the sight I've had for all these years.
Go ahead.
But does that make any sense?
It does.
With your...
It's an essential fatty acid that you're getting in the seed. And I have to tell you, my patients are my best teachers. I learned a great deal from my patients, and I'm very grateful. So I'm going to look into that one further. So thank you. Great.
Next, I think. And the problem is I have night sweats.
Right.
And I have them 1 to 3 times a night, soak and wet.
Okay.
That's just the first problem. I have another problem too, but I can...
What's the second one? See if they're tied together.
What's the second one? Forgot. Anyway.
Do you remember the second one? Pardon? AFib?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Atrial fib.
All right. And how old are you, sir?
I'm young. I'll be 77 next month.
All right. You're an older kid. Good. So
I try to stay active.
Pardon?
I try to stay active.
So night sweats are an issue from a number of different possibilities, not uncommonly hormonal. Now, men go through male menopause, called andropause. Okay, it's called andropause in men. So testosterone drops. So now the ratio between estrogen and testosterone distorts. So we check the adrenals especially, that are responsible for making testosterone. And in women, when they go through menopause, the adrenals make estradiol and progesterone. The problem is when we hit that age of andropause and menopause, our adrenals are typically quite shot from stress through life. So they can't compensate the way they're designed to make testosterone in men and estradiol and progesterone in women. So we measure those things to see what the status looks like and then replenish what's necessary to bring up those capacities to optimize the balance of those hormones. And night sweats are not uncommon in men when I see that adrenal picture disrupted. The other part of it is the liver. The liver is essential to cleanse the body, but also conjugate the hormones so they can be properly regulated. So we deal with the liver. In many of my patients, the liver is a central focus. I was sharing even last night with their family. I had a patient that was just sick. I dealt with her virtually, and she was convinced she had a kidney problem. So she's doing all these things to take care of the kidneys. I said, well, possibly, let's check it out. So we ran chemistries on her, and I looked at her chemistries very carefully. I said, your kidneys are fine. The liver is gone. You have major work to do. After 2 weeks of cleaning the liver, she was fine. Totally fine. She's now pursuing understanding the Lord. She's asking to know about Jesus. She didn't start out that way at all. She was running in the other direction. But that really struck me. So with night sweats, look to the liver, look to the gut, look to the adrenals. That's where we start. They're not there for no reason. Again, you go searching to find out what's behind it. So I'm going to encourage that kind of thing for you. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not take this for that. It's understanding what's behind it, and when you understand behind it, and then you can reason again from cause to effect to see why the night sweat's happening like this. So I've had many patients with night sweats that get through them. Mostly women after menopause, sometimes men after andropause. So the adrenals have to compensate for the loss of the hormones from the target organs after that time of life. So we look to how your body does that. And not only can your adrenals make the hormones, but can your liver and gut metabolize the hormones so you can make use of them. So those are important. So we clean up the body, clean up the diet, establish integrity to the adrenals, clean up the liver and the gut, and then go from there.
He doesn't know how to clean up the liver and clean up the gut. So I was just going to give you something practical.
Good.
My husband is a scientist and a deep thinker, but something practical. Every person who's come to our retreat who had night sweats, we put them on organic raw food only. You can even make your salad dressing, fresh lemon juice, and a raw nut and raw garlic. And you make your dressing. You eat salads. You do what I did. You do raw food for 10 days, and I know your gut will clean up. And every case I've had of that, the night sweats stop. It's a cleanse. And 2 meals a day, and don't eat between meals. Just try it and pray.
So I told my wife I'm giving her an honorary degree. She's better than most physicians. She's had a lot of experience, and she's very practical, which I appreciate.
I have 2 adult children that both got COVID, and they both have lost their taste and their smell. Is there some way to get that back?
Okay. So in the literature that's coming out now, and the research that's coming out now, with long-term taste and smell loss, we're finding out some of the reasons behind it. Now, first of all, were they vaccinated? No. Good. All right. So it's a neurologic symptom, and I had COVID for 4 days and lost taste and smell for 4 days. It's not a fun experience. All I could do was sleep, and I got through it, and I could taste again. So I have great empathy for people that can't taste or smell. It's really not a fun experience in the least. So those patients that have taste smell issues, one of the most principal nutrients to take in is zinc, and also the zinc ionophores. So now, quercetin, pardon?
Zinc and what else?
They're called zinc ionophores. They let zinc get into the cell. So taking zinc isn't enough. You want to get the zinc into the cell. So artemisinin or Artemisia annua, which is wormwood, which is what ivermectin is made from, and quercetin, a dye in food, which is what hydroxychloroquine is made from. So instead of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, just use Artemisia annua, wormwood, and quercetin. Okay? Now, Artemisia annua is getting harder and harder to find because the FDA keeps wanting to take it off the market because it's effective. And quercetin they try to block, and NAC they try to block. So zinc, quercetin, and Artemisia annua, wormwood. I like the one called Artemis Plus by Natura. It's a company we use out of Ashland, Oregon, because of the cofactors that they've devised. It's a superb formula. Okay, that's the one I take if I need to take that. And so, but that along with C, NAC, D, these are essentials. But those 3, especially zinc and the zinc ionophores of quercetin and artemisinin. Now, it turns out that artemisinin is also used to treat malaria better than any other drug. All right, it's been used by billions of people, literally, with no side effects. So, and that's what became ivermectin. But we use Artemisia to do that, same thing. So it'll get zinc into the cell and work really well to get the taste and smell back.
Okay, and also I am dealing with severe osteoporosis.
Okay.
And I feel like I'm taking more supplements than I am eating food.
Right.
So what do you recommend?
So with osteoporosis, osteopenia, you've got to get nutrients into the bone, and you've got to strengthen the bone. So there's two keys. The form I like is by Designs for Health. There's a nutrient concentration called Osteoforce or Osteoben. Osteoforce is a horse pill. Osteoben is a capsule. The horse pill is stronger, but many people can't swallow it, so we use Osteoben instead. But they're both called medical foods. That is, they've been researched and tested to prove that they in fact do what they're designed to do.
Maybe it would be appropriate. We can put you in touch with a supply house where you can get these things, all of these things, cheaper than he could sell them right out of our own office. We quit selling because we want people can get it for a good price, and it's an online supply house that you need to call our office, and she'll give you how to do that. There's a 2-step process to do that, and she'll walk you through it.
Yeah, Vinny can walk you through that if you need to, but that's
Yeah.
what I like to use. So you get the nutrients necessary. That's not all, but we test the chemistry is needed overall. And again, make sure the rest of the hormonal system's in balance. So you're not tearing down the bone with cortisol. So the adrenals are strengthened. These all tie together. The other is exercise. You must weight train. You must weight train and walk. Walk 45 minutes a day. Don't hitchhike. Okay? So go out 22 and a half minutes, turn around and walk home. All right? I'm serious. 45 minutes a day walking. And then light weight training. Always do 2 sets of 20 reps, whatever weight you can do for any muscle you're working out, so you can finish the second set of 20 and survive it. All right? And you'll start gaining strength, and you can lift more weight. That's what happens with weight training. But you want to stress that living tissue called bone. That's a must. Without that, the bone does not remineralize. It remineralizes appropriately when you're stressing the bone, so it's being called upon to respond to those stresses by properly laying down new bone. Otherwise, you get only osteoclastic activity and you destroy bone. You want osteoblastic activity to lay down new bone, and that's responding to stresses. When the astronauts went up in the early flights, they all came back osteoporotic. So they realized they have to exercise. So they had exercise routines when in space, and they were weightless. Otherwise, they'd lose bone density right away because they weren't stressing the bone. Now, gravity here is not enough. Otherwise, you can lay flat in bed and hope for the best. Okay? So you want to physically stress the bone by actively weight training every single muscle group in the body. Please. Good. Uh-huh.
So just a couple real basic questions. I was drinking soy milk quite a bit, so I'm assuming you would recommend not to drink soy milk anymore. And could you recommend a good plant-based milk, or is it just best to make your own from scratch? And then my second question would be, Sister White in the Spirit of Prophecy talked about baking powder, and that tends to be a little bit of a controversy among some Adventists where they say, well, the reason she said it was not good is because of the metal. So if you get a non-aluminum one, that's safer. I just want to know what your opinion is on that. And then my third question real quick is, I have heard recently that it is dangerous to heat up nuts and seeds beyond 200 degrees because it can cause toxins in those. And I just wanted to know if that's true, if you've heard of that.
Sure.
Thank you.
So I agree with your concept of soy milk. So I don't encourage soy milk. The other milk I don't encourage is almond milk, by the way, unless it's tested. So the most common nut antigen I find is almonds. The most common, even more than peanuts. Peanuts are typically driven by genetics, but almonds are more developed because of what they do to the almond before they're even sold, even as organic almonds.
You can make your own nut milk so easy. but don't even filter the pulp out of it. You just get used to tasting a nutty tasting milk, and it's okay if it still has the pulp. But you just take your nut and whiz it, or seed, or sunflower seeds make nuts. If you don't have any problem with fats, you can take a coconut milk plain. It doesn't have all of the properties that they're putting in nut milk now. It doesn't have oil in it, doesn't have processed oil and different things. You can just take a coconut milk, but you have to find a brand that doesn't have fillers in it. A lot of them have fillers in them. And then just add water to your coconut milk and thin it down. But I don't like purchased milk. If you look at the ingredients, they're putting all kinds of things in there that we don't need.
Right. Especially gums. Yeah. So
Gar gum and
carrageenan, etc.
It just whiz the nut with water. If it's too much like cream, add some more water. If it's too watery, like 1%, then just add a few more nuts and shake it up every time you use it, and it's wonderful. It doesn't keep very long.
But you can use almond milk if you do it with almonds.
Well,
just by your whizzing it up in water.
Well, almonds are treated with Pirelli, and unless you can find an almond without Pirelli, almond milk is not that good for you. Lots of people are allergic to almonds. We take them off of almonds on certain cases if it shows up that way, and they feel so much better. So there's so many other nuts. You can make walnut milk, you can make pumpkin seed milk. Sometimes you mix them. You can make sesame seed milk, sunflower seed milk. You just whiz the nut in the milk. That's it. I don't put anything else in it. Cashews? Yep, cashews. And you can make a gravy. It's absolutely the easiest gravy, and it's absolutely wonderful. You take your cashews and blend them, and you add more than you usually would use. You take more than you would usually use for
I just finished addressing the quick questions here.
Yeah. And
so there's other options. Now regarding heating up nuts, seeds, and then the baking soda or baking powder issue, aluminum obviously you don't want, including alum. So you want to be very careful with that. Now I don't know what was in baking powder in Ellen White's day. I've not investigated that to know. So I'll defer to my wife in terms of baking powder and cooking. I'm not a cook if it's not obvious to you by now. Okay? I'm a taster and I'm a cleaner, but I'm not the cook. So baking powder is something I don't encourage for many people. It can be alkalinizing, sodium bicarbonate. It can be too alkalinizing for some people. The pancreas is designed to make sodium bicarbonate, as I said, to neutralize the acid contents of the stomach as they go into the small intestine and the duodenum. So we need that, but we don't need large amounts of it, and you don't want to alkalinize the stomach too much. So in food, small amounts to do whatever it does in food, I'll leave that up to my wife. I just appreciate what she does with it. And then last question about heating up seeds and nuts. So if you heat these things up, they're going to go rancid. So if you heat them up, you want them warm, eat them right away. It's a simple version. Good.
So I work with people in the community. I do Bible studies with them and things. And I'm wondering how can I help them to get off of drugs, nicotine, those types of things. And usually their bodies, they're not really able to think as well, and they don't have motivation to change things. And so I feel like I'm telling them, you should change this or this or this. And they're like, oh, fine, I can't do that.
Right.
Do you have suggestions of how to help people?
I do. Are you going to them or are they coming to you?
I'm doing Bible studies with them, and so in the process of that.
So they're coming to you for spiritual development and Bible studies, not for health issues. Okay? So in my experience, if a person doesn't have a motivation to see an issue, nothing's going to change. If they don't see their need, that's allowed to see an issue. I wish you were hot or cold. You see your need and have it met in Christ, or not met at all, but you know the need is there. If they don't have a need, they're not going to do anything. They don't care. I have a very select clientele because they see their need. They're in pain or they're afraid. Those are the motivators. They've reached a limit at that lower level. They say, look, any more and I'm afraid of what's going to happen. Okay? I fear for my life and my health, my long-term capacity to function, and my brain and my heart, etc. So I hurt. Please help me. So I have a select group of people that come to me who have a motivation to change, and they're ready to change. And I have patients that come that are alcoholics, that are druggies, that are strung out on coffee, the greatest drug in this country, on tobacco, which is one of the worst to get rid of. All right, it's like heroin. We see junkies, we meth addicts. We see all kinds of people like this. And if they come to us with a need to change, then we can help them. If they don't, I can't. So in many cases, I'll ask the patient, they'll tell me their history, and I'll say, okay, how can I help you? I don't offer anything. Until I've enlisted their will to want to make a change, I say nothing. I just say, how can I help you? Tell me what's going on. Okay. And I'm listening carefully, and there's nothing in their commentary about wanting to make a change. If they're motivated, I don't have to ask that question. They've already told me. But if they haven't, all I say is, how can I help you? And then they stop. They go, oh, I'm talking to this guy for a reason. I really want to make a change. I say, okay. And in some cases, I say, do you want to live or do you want to die? I said, if you want to live, I can help you. If you want to die, I'm not a mortician. I'm a physician. I can't help you die. I'm not the right person for you. But if you want to live, I'm here to help you. So I put it back into their court. So they understand their need and their will is enlisted to the process of healing. If your will is not enlisted to Christ, what can you do? He can't force his way. There's no coercion in the court of the Lord, as Sister White put it. I love that statement. So the Lord's love is never pushed. Otherwise, he'd be a stalker. He's not. He stands at the door and knocks. He waits for us. And so do the same thing with the people you address. You're going through these kind of situations. Are you okay where you are? Do you like the kind of life you're experiencing? Wait. Let it become a conversation until you've gathered attention on their part to say, oh, let me dialogue this further. Until you ask them, what is it that you're wanting? And how can I help you? Once you have enlisted their will, then there's a lot of things you can do to help them. Like we've been talking about, clean up the diet. Get them off the pro-inflammatory things and things that are also addictive, especially sugar. Find out how their lifestyle is, what they're eating. If you have to measure stuff to find out what's going on. Put them on a clean diet like my wife's talking about. Get them on a raw vegan diet. Wow. Very fast. 2 weeks, things start to move rapidly. Okay? So there's a lot you can do to be of help to them. Thank you. But first, you have to engage their will, their attention, and their desire, their motivation to want to make a change. Otherwise, whatever you say is in one ear, out the other. They don't care. They have no motivation to want to know. So I would start with that. Not what to do, but how to address them, connect with them. When my wife first met me before we were married, she brought me to the Lord. I was teaching in Switzerland. I won't go to the testimony right now. It's incredible. The Lord brought us together unquestioned to pluck me as a brand from the fire. And she didn't come to me with what I call in-your-face Christianity, which I had met all my life. People telling me I'm a sinner, I'm bad. I'm thinking, and you know better? Who are you to tell me? I didn't get it. They didn't talk to me about the love of Jesus, showing it in their heart. They were scolding me for who I wasn't. I thought, but I can't change that. What are you talking about? So Rhonda came, the Lord brought this angel to my life to teach me his word. But she first listened to me and realized the desire of my heart was to know God. I just didn't know how. And then she started with studies, and then she listened to me further and addressed my questions, didn't have an agenda for what I had to know. And steadily, I led her through what to teach me about God's word and his sanctuary, to have me understand from my own view that she didn't even know what I was thinking, to realize that what I was thinking was wrong. So the motivation was there, but there was nowhere to take it until this angel came into my life and showed me from God's word based on the questions I was asking. So she just kept pace with me. Didn't go ahead of me, didn't stay behind me, just kept pace with me. And that's what you're going to do with your people, with the people you work with. Keep pace with them. Wherever they are, stay there. Address it from God's word, but you're not preaching at them. You're touching their heart. You're listening to them. You're having a conversation with them. And you're showing them the love of God in your character. That's the key. You care for them. When a patient comes to my office, do you know what I see them as? Already whole in Christ. That's where I start with my patients, and I never let go of that. To me, they're already healed. It's just a matter of time. And I tell them that. I say, we can take care of this. You're already healed. It's done. In Christ, you're whole. And I hold that, and I pray for them, and I pray with them. And they get it. And they're motivated, and they're moved because someone finally cares. Someone heard them. How many times have they gone to doctors and no one heard a word they said? They didn't care. They didn't have the time for it. Up 10 minutes, I got to go. They literally get up and walk out of the room mid-sentence. The person's going, and they can't finish the conversation. Stop. Listen to them. Take it to heart so they know you care about them because you do. You can't feign that. You can't pretend that. You have it or you don't. If you don't go there. If you do, address them, serve them. That's what you're here to do. We're here to serve one another. Christ came to minister, not be ministered unto. He's our example. We're here to minister, not be ministered to. So you're ministering to these people. I call them patients. You call them clients, whatever. They're just people in need, in desperate need. Many of them don't even know their need, let alone how to fulfill that need. So you pray for them. Pray as them. See them as whole in Christ. When you go to teach them a Bible, see them as whole in Christ. He healed them first so he could hear them. They could hear his message. If their brains weren't clear, they couldn't hear him. They couldn't fathom what he was saying. He was the message of heaven. He was the message from heaven. He was giving them the message right from the throne of grace from heaven. And they could only hear him when their bodies were cleansed and their brains were cleansed and they could recover physically the right arm of the gospel. Now, if you're right-handed and the right arm of the gospel, it's going to lead. All right? It's not the gospel, it's the right arm that protects and moves forward and grabs hold of. Let that happen. So just keep pace with the people you work with and list their will gently, carefully, by listening to them, listening to their story. Let them tell you their story. This is important. That's their testimony. And you're enhancing their testimony in Christ as they see Christ in you. And you listen to them carefully with no agenda. I tell my patients, I have no agenda for you. I'm going to follow your lead. And then I'll tell them, but the agenda I do have is that you heal. So I do have an agenda. But that's why you've come to me. So I hold that truth that they're already whole in Christ. Even if it's been based on my faith for them, that's fine. That's what Daniel did for Israel. All right? I have no problem with that. I will pray as my kids, as my patients, as the people I love, if I have to. So pray as him, as you pray for him. But listen to his story, please. And he will tell you what's going on. And as you listen and track him and have him understand what he's saying, he'll get to a place where he can then look up. And who's he going to see? Jesus. Standing right there in front of him in you. Caring for him. And then you can add information as he can take it in. Like, may I make a suggestion? Don't tell him anything. Ask for permission. I do this to my patients all the time. Okay? I say, may I say something? They go, yeah. I said, thank you. And then I'll add information. All right? Be kind, be gentle, be considerate of them. And they will then open their heart more and more and more to you. And as they do, their story becomes clear, and you can then work with that story as you would with a friend, because that's who they are and that's who you are to them. Good.
Okay, this is the last question. We're just about to finish. We are wrapping up right now, and thank you so much for being here and for taking so much time. Last question, as you've talked about those pro-inflammatory things and so on, the first one on your list was gluten, and gluten is in so many different aspects of our diet. So my question is that you said there's research to back this up. Where can we put our hands? I would like some specific research articles that I can read myself.
Sure.
You said that there were some that were published on PubMed and some of these other places. Could you put together a list of different things that we can do some research? Because I'm not unwilling, but I want to understand.
Sure.
So please help us out here, because otherwise, our eyes glaze over and we're like, well, I can't do that. It's just impossible, and it just looks like Mount Everest at this time.
Sure. So I'm going to respond in two ways to that. When I work with a patient in pain, and I test gliadins, glutens, inulins, occludins, the things that are derived from gluten, and they can see in their body what's going on, they get it. And they're hurting, or they're exhausted, or they have gut pain, or whatever, or indigestion. And they go, okay, I see it. But if you haven't had that testing done, or you're not convinced, I'll be happy to put together a group of papers that you can refer to showing the interleukin-10 reaction in the gut, and you can see what it does.
Yeah, I have no question. There are certain people that are very gluten intolerant, and there's no question. I know people like that, and probably I don't know what the research out there, and so this is where I'm like, I'm willing to read. I have an open mind and so on. So, but we want to understand this further.
No question. I love intelligent patients that ask questions. I learn from them. They keep me in school continually, which I love to do because I love learning. So I'm happy to prepare that and provide it for you. Thank you so much.
Okay, why don't we close with a word of prayer?
Thank you.
Please close.
So again, this has been a delight, and thank you so much for being attentive and for your questions. Heavenly Father, Lord, it is our privilege, our honor to come to the throne of grace in the name of Jesus. And we thank you that you've made a way for us to come to you through your Son. And thank you, Lord, for your gift of life, your gift of love to each one of us, your gift of salvation and your gift of healing, and your gift of faith. Lord, may that grow in each one of us, that your very will may be ours, your very thoughts may be ours, your life may be ours. And Lord, I pray that we may live a life that demonstrates Jesus and his health, his wisdom, his mind, his humility, and his love. May we demonstrate that to all that we meet, that we are the gospel that they would see to lead them to Jesus. May their hearts be opened to whatever we may provide. May we live the life you would have us live to demonstrate your majesty to this world. For this I ask in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.